Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hi, this is Tim Donner with LNTV, and the Supreme Court keeps churning out decisions, with significant ones now out on gerrymandering and retaliatory arrests and federal criminal sentencing. Here to analyze, as usual, is LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. Scott, let's start with gerrymandering, which in a political sense is American as apple pie.
Yes, Tim, this was a big issue that a lot of people had a lot of energy behind on both sides of it, I'll say, and the Supreme Court essentially kicked the can down the road. There was a case out of Wisconsin where Democrats had filed suit after the 2010 redrawing of district lines there that they felt disfavored Democrats. And there was a case out of Maryland pursuant to a 2011 redistricting in Maryland where Republicans felt like they were disadvantaged as well. So in the case of the Maryland issue, the Supreme Court was judging whether or not the district court was right to not issue a preliminary injunction in that case. They basically said, yes, the district court was right. They haven't proved enough evidence to substantiate a finding whereby you would basically draw an injunction and say you can't implement these new district lines. In Wisconsin, what they said was there's only one voter who testified that said that basically that voter's interests were sufficiently damaged so that they would have standing to sue. So what's going to happen in that case is it's going to be returned to Wisconsin, where we can bet, the smart money bet, Tim, is that more Democrat voters will be able to be found in the various districts that say, I was discriminated against because of this redrawing of district lines, and we may see that case percolate back up through the courts. There seems to be a big appetite by some members of the court to find the right redistricting case to then be able to articulate what the exact standard of when redistricting becomes impermissible in terms of violating the rights of a political minority and where it doesn't. It's a very vague area now, and we still don't have an answer.
And of course, what gerrymandering has ultimately achieved is to reduce the number of competitive congressional districts, because the parties exchange districts which both know the other's going to win or lose for sure. And so in Congress, where 90% or more of incumbents are elected every 2 years, we're not going to see much change when gerrymandering is so widespread. But let's move on to retaliatory arrests and what the court had to say about that issue.
Tim, this was a great opportunity, I think, for the Supreme Court to really boost liberty in the country in a significant way, and unfortunately they did not seize the opportunity to do so. The good news is that Fane Lozman, that's a person's name, first name Fane, second name Lozman, won again at the Supreme Court. He lives in Riviera Beach, Florida, and the government officials there don't much like him and have used the power of their government to express that dislike. Now, Mr. Lozman has responded in numerous ways by suing them and winning, and he did win again at the Supreme Court. He was arrested after speaking out at a city council meeting and not shutting up when he was told to shut up. Now, he believed that he was arrested as basically a retaliatory measure for the positions that he takes against the city on numerous issues. The city says, hey, look, he was disorderly, and that's why he was arrested. So the question then became, if an arrest is motivated not by the conduct that's the illegal conduct, but a separate free speech issue, is that a legal arrest? So for instance, Tim, if you're driving down the street in a jurisdiction where the police chief hates Donald Trump and you have a Donald Trump bumper sticker on your car and you're doing 26 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone, certainly you are exceeding the posted speed limit and could be ticketed for that. But if the only people that are ticketed, right, are people who disagree with the political leanings of the constabulary, well, then you've got a problem. And that's what was alleged here. Unfortunately, Tim, the Supreme Court did not institute what I think would have been an appropriate and broad decision to say that you don't, that having probable cause for a crime does not mean that a person can't sue on that crime if the motives are impermissible. That's not what the Supreme Court said here. They introduced a kind of a long test that basically is not going to apply to many, if any, cases beyond Mr. Lozman's.
Okay, well, let's move on to the issue of federal criminal sentencing, because we have a massive federal criminal justice structure. We have more criminals in jail on federal charges by far than any other nation in the world. A lot of it is because of 3 strikes, you're out policies that have been implemented over the years. And so the court has now weighed in on the often overlooked but significant issue of federal criminal sentencing. What do they have to say?
Well, Tim, this case concerned a federal criminal defendant who was sentenced under a pre-sentencing report that incorrectly stated the sentencing guidelines. So if you are convicted of a crime in federal court, the court staff will present a pre-sentencing report. And that's a very complicated sort of algebraic equation of regarding prior arrests and prior convictions, and coming up with a formula in order to recommend a sentencing, a number of months that you will be sentenced to the judge. And this defendant the pre-sentencing report was incorrect. Now, the thing that makes the case interesting is the man was sentenced to a number of months in federal prison within the correct guidelines within the correct guidelines if they were correctly represented. So let's say hypothetically the guidelines say 77 months to 87 months, and he was sentenced to 80 months. But later we found out that was an incorrect guideline, and it should have been 79 months to 85 months. Well, his sentence was still within the guidelines. But the Supreme Court ruled that because such deference is given to the guidelines, that this results in an error that must be corrected by the court, and the man gets a new sentencing hearing. So I think it's a win for liberty, and I really think that what needs to happen, Tim, and Justice Thomas and Alito were the dissenters in this case, I believe, and they spoke of how much the courts rely on these sentencing guidelines like they're laws, but they're not laws, they're just guidelines. And so I think, if anything, what the best possible takeaway from this case could be is that federal district judges will look at those guidelines really like guidelines and not as firm instructions in the law.
Okay, thank you, Scott, and thanks for keeping us abreast on all these Supreme Court decisions that might otherwise go overlooked.
Thanks, Tim.
And you can catch all of Scott's work. As we say, he's our legal affairs editor, also illegal affairs editor at libertynation.com. And don't forget, you've been watching this video. If you go below, you'll have a chance to get this libertynation.com Truth is Making a Comeback cap. All you got to do is subscribe to this YouTube channel, leave a comment, and your name goes into the hopper, in the mix, for a free libertynation.com Truth is Making a Comeback. I'm Tim Donner, and this is LNTV.
Subscribe and like this video. libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.